This lesson shows some other methods that one might actually use to plot data. In particular, it shows how one creates a histogram, which is a simple method to show the density of some data, and a scatter plot. It also shows the sort of basic way of how we would save a figure if we want to include it in another document, for example, in a Word, a report, or some other sort of file. So I'm going to start, again, here I'm using PyCharm Professional again. It just creates a nice sort of experience here. And I'm going to just close this. So the first thing I'm going to run is I'm just going to run my setup block again. This is what's needed to allow plots to be shown. We're now going to start by loading the data again. So we're going to load the same data we had on the previous assignment. So I'm going to have IBM equals, I'm going to start by importing pandas. It's in data, HF. It says hf.hdf above, but in fact it's hf.h5. Imagine by the time you actually download the notebook, it will have the right text above. And this is under the key IBM. Also import Microsoft, which is under the key Microsoft. So I can just run this cell. It ran successfully on the right, but of course, there's no reason to do that. But there's a useful command in pandas where I can just use a command describe, which will tell me a little bit about a data series. So it tells me there's 8,553 observations, the mean, the standard deviation, the min, the quantiles, and the max. It's just a simple way to get some numerical descriptions about it. These are series. If I had them together in a data frame, I could run the same command and it would give me a description of each of the components in a data frame. So now that I have the data in, I'm asked to produce a histogram of 1-minute returns of Microsoft. So the first thing we need to do is we need to compute 1-minute returns. So what I have, of course, in Microsoft is I have prices. Prices are uneven. So in particular, if I took a look at, say, the first 10 observations in Microsoft, you can see the timestamps are uneven. They're not at any particular sort of frequency, no sort of particular fixed period between timestamps. That's because these are actual high-frequency transactions. So what I want to do then is I need to resample the data. In particular, I want to sample every minute. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use Microsoft. Then I'm going to use a pandas tool called resample. So when I resample data, I tell it how often I want to resample. In this case, I want to resample every 60 seconds. When you resample data, what it's going to do, essentially, it's going to create 60-second blocks of data. And then I have to tell it how I want to resample. The way we want to resample these prices is I want to just take the last price. So in other words, every minute, give me the last price in that minute. And that's going to give me a new set of prices. So I'll just call that subsampled, and we'll take a look at the first 10 observations of that. So now you can see I have a really regular sampling frequency, 930, 931, 932, 933. So resampling is a really powerful tool that's available in pandas that lets me very easily change the frequency. In particular, it makes it very easy to sample less frequently than the frequency of my data, or to sample on a regular basis when my data has an irregular sampling period. For example, I can sample end of the month if I have daily data, or weekly data. There's a lot of really nice features of resampling. But now that I have these subsampled, I just want to turn them into prices. I want to turn them into returns, excuse me. So let's call it Microsoft returns. It's simply going to be subsampled, and then percent change. I don't really want that first one to be around. That first one is always going to be missing because, of course, I can't create the first return, so it's always missing whenever I call percent change. So that gives me my Microsoft returns. Again, nothing to actually show from that cell. And then finally, I want to actually produce a histogram. So I have Microsoft returns. Then I would go to plot, And if I just did plot, that would create a line plot. That's what we actually saw on the last page. So I don't want to actually call that as a function. I want to use that as a module. And then I'm going to say generate a histogram. I'm going to go ahead and save the axis that comes out of that. And then I'm going to go ahead and set a title there. I'm going to call it 1 minute Microsoft returns. And when I'm ready, I can simply run this. And right away, you see that I get the plot I liked. You know, again, I find this plot to be a little bit small. So if I want, I can use the same thing that I did in the previous. So I can import matplotlib, pyplot. I can do plot. And then change the default figure size. Then I can rerun it, and I'll get a sort of slightly nicer aesthetic. So we can see we get the returns. Those are quite small numbers. Obviously, these are high-frequency 1-minute returns, so you wouldn't expect something like 1%. You'd get sort of numbers much, much smaller than 1%. But, you know, this is a simple way to generate a histogram. The next plot asks me to produce a scatter plot of 5-minute Microsoft returns against 5-minute IBM returns. So again, this is not what I have in my original data. My original data is high-frequency tick data, which happens on an irregular calendar. And so the one thing I need to do is I need to create the 5-minute return series. I need to then merge them into a single data frame. And then finally, I can produce a scatter plot from that. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before, except I'm going to resample. I'm going to resample every 300 seconds, take the last price, and then compute the percent change. So that's Microsoft returns. IBM returns are going to be exactly the same. Percent change. And then I'm simply going to put them together. And I'll use a dictionary to put them together. I'll use these will be the column names. Will be Microsoft and IBM. And I'm going to drop any missing values. So we'll take a look at what I have there. Take a look at the first 10 of my returns, and there you can see we have a return at 935, 940, 945, and so on. I don't have the 931 because, of course, I had 930 prices, but I don't have 930 returns. I lost that return when I constructed I lost that very first price when I constructed the returns. So that is a data frame now. Rets is a data frame containing both of my series of returns. So I want to construct a scatter plot of Microsoft against IBM. So I'm simply going to do rets. Again, I'm going to use plot, but I'm not, of course, going to call plot as a function. That would generate 2 lines. In fact, if I just did that, very naively, you can see there's my 2 sort of return series. Not particularly interesting to see them plotted as line plots. So I don't really want to do that. What I want to do is use scatter. So I want to do .plot.scatter. Then the 2 most important arguments are what are my x and my y going to be. So I want x to be equal to Microsoft, y to be equal to IBM. I'm going to give it a marker, which we saw on the line plots before. So I'm going to have an x marks the spot. And I'm going to change the default marker size to make it a little bit bigger. So that's pretty straightforward to do. Now, if I want, I could even change the color to make it red. So there's a lot of optional features here, of course. We don't need to go through every one in detail. I'll just run that plot, and there is the scatter plot. So again, that's a really basic scatter plot. One could sort of be finished there and say that's it. But in this case, I'm not sort of super happy with that. I find it to be a little bit too much space, a lot of dead white space. I often might want to zoom in. So we can do that the same way we changed the x-axis before. So I can do ax.set xlim, and ax.set ylimbs. This is going to change the x limit and the y limit, but I got to figure out what I want to actually use as my limits. And I'm going to use the lower to be equal to the minimum return from both series. So in other words, the smallest, the most negative return, I'm going to multiply that by 1.1. In other words, it'll be about 10% lower than the smallest total return. Upper is going to be the same, except of course it's going to be a max now. Do 110% of that. And now I want my x lim to be lower, upper. And I want my y lim to also be lower, upper. So I could run that plot. And now I have a sort of much tighter plot that's zoomed in. Again, it has about 10% margin on at least one of the axes. And that provides a little bit sort of more meaningful plot. So that's a sort of, again, a really basic example of a scatter plot. Finally, now that I have my plots sorted out, the one thing I need to do is I need to actually save it, because often we'll want to use these in a report or a project or do something else with it. So again, I'm going to use matplotlib. So I'll just import it again. I think I imported it above, but just for good measure, I'll just import it there. And then what I need to do is I need to get a figure. So I don't have the figure, the most recent figure. So I'm just going to use fig equals plot.gcf. So GCF will give me the most recent figure. So get current figure. And now that I have the figure, I can save it. And I'm going to save it as a PDF. So I just use a PDF extension. Matplotlib will automatically know that needs to be a PDF. I can also save it as other formats. For example, you might want to save it as a PNG. In which case, then there's some other options you can use. I can save it with a transparent background. I can change the DPI equal to 300, which will give me a sort of smoother plot. When I'm ready, I can just hit enter. It all saves. Of course, I don't actually see anything. And I should have my figures should be around here somewhere. I'm not quite sure where they've gone. You'd like to think they'd be around here somewhere. Let's take a look in Explorer. Hopefully they'll show up. Yeah, there's a scatter plot there. A PDF file did not actually seem to produce anything. And there's a PNG file with a scatter plot. It also didn't seem to produce anything. So that's because my figure was empty. So what I can do if I want to be a little more careful is I can do ax.get figure, assign my figure from that. That'll give me the figure that goes with the most recent axis. I can run that cell again. It says no output, which again I think is expected. And I can just open in PyCharm my PNG file. And there you can see there's the PNG file that has the data that I wanted. So it has a transparent background. It has red X's everywhere, and I could take that file and include it in Word. So this has been, again, a really lightning introduction to producing a couple other types of plots. There are lots of plots you can produce with pandas. You can consult the help file for plot. Matplotlib also contains a lot of plots. There's a really good set of demonstrations on the Matplotlib website, which I recommend taking a look at, especially if you're trying to do some fancier plots or understand how to do certain things. This lesson showed how dataframeplot.hist and dataframeplot.scatter can be used to produce histograms and scatter plots. Figures are saved using the savefig method of any figure. Sometimes you have to get the figure. A good way to get the figure is to call getFigure on an axis. Figure savefig can be used to export to a variety of useful formats, including PDF, PNG, JPEG, and SVG. Finally, this lesson showed a few other minor functions. In particular, dataframe resample is a useful method to change the sampling frequency of a dataset. And ax.set and then value, so that's what I have set star, allows lots of features of plots to be changed. So some examples we've seen so far are set xlim and set ylim, also set title, set xlabel, and set ylabel.